about their investigation into the deaths of the actor Gene Hackman and his wife Betsy Arakawa. They say he died from heart disease after his wife passed away from a rare infectious illness.
Gene Hackman, the legendary two-time Oscar winner, carved a lasting legacy in Hollywood with iconic roles in The French Connection and Unforgiven. His ability to portray complex, morally ambiguous characters earned him critical acclaim and a beloved place in cinema history. However, behind the scenes, Hackman's life was far more complicated. After his death in 2025, his family uncovered a hidden fortune of $80 million, which exposed a web of secrets, emotional distance, and betrayal. Today, we'll dive deep into Hackman's hidden wealth and its impact on his family, revealing a story of success and its emotional cost, one that would forever change the way they viewed their father. Gene Hackman's retreat from Hollywood, a desire for peace or emotional distance. After decades of grueling work in Hollywood, Gene Hackman made the decision to retire from acting in the early 2000s. This retreat from the spotlight seemed to signal a desire for peace and quiet, a chance to enjoy the remainder of his life away from the constant glare of fame. Hackman moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico, a far cry from the frenetic pace of Los Angeles and the relentless demands of a Hollywood career. There, in the tranquil landscape of the Southwest, he lived a relatively reclusive existence with his wife, Betsy Arakawa. To outsiders, it seemed like a wise and peaceful choice, one that allowed him to reclaim control of his life after years of stress, long hours, and the pressures of being a global superstar. But for those who knew Hackman more intimately, his withdrawal from Hollywood wasn't just about seeking serenity, it was also a reflection of his long-standing pattern of emotional distance, particularly when it came to his family. While Hackman's public persona was one of an engaging and compassionate actor, those closest to him, his children from his first marriage, had a vastly different experience. For them, Hackman was not a father who was physically or emotionally present. His dedication to his career came at the cost of his relationship with his children, creating a chasm that would only widen with time. His decision to retire and step away from public life, while initially seen as an attempt to preserve his peace, was, in hindsight, a continuation of this pattern. Hackman's emotional withdrawal from the spotlight mirrored the emotional distance he maintained from his family throughout his life. The hidden struggles of Hackman's family, a legacy of emotional absence. Gene Hackman's personal life was not as polished as his film career. His first marriage, to Faye Maltese, produced 3 children: Christopher, Elizabeth, and Leslie. As Hackman's fame grew in the 1970s and 1980s, so did the demands of his work. He spent long hours on set, traveling for film shoots, and immersing himself in the world of Hollywood. This left his children largely to grow up without a consistent father figure in their lives. Hackman himself has admitted to the toll his career took on his family, acknowledging in rare interviews that he failed as a father during this period. "My career came first, and that was wrong," he once said, a sentiment that reflected deep regret, but came too late to mend the damage. While Hackman may have been physically absent, he provided for his family financially. His children, never wanting for material things, grew up in relative comfort, but this material abundance did little to fill the emotional void left by their father's absence. His children, particularly his son Christopher, were left to navigate their formative years without the emotional connection that many children take for granted. Christopher, in particular, felt as though he didn't truly know his father. He would later describe his relationship with Hackman as distant, with his father remaining emotionally unavailable and often cold. The lack of genuine fatherly connection created emotional scars that would last well into adulthood, and Hackman's children struggled with feelings of abandonment and neglect. This emotional absence extended beyond Hackman's family life and into his relationships with friends and colleagues. Despite his celebrity status and public persona, Hackman was known to be a private, sometimes solitary individual. He preferred to keep his personal life out of the public eye, and while this inclination to protect his privacy was understandable to an extent, it became clear that it also contributed to a growing emotional divide between Hackman and those who cared for him most. The shocking discovery: Gene Hackman's hidden fortune. While Hackman's children were used to their father's emotional distance, they were unprepared for the shocking revelation that came after his death. When Hackman passed away in February 2025, the world mourned the loss of a Hollywood giant. But in the aftermath of his death, as his children and close family members began sorting through his affairs, they uncovered a series of startling discoveries about his wealth. A fortune worth an estimated $80 million. Hackman had amassed his fortune over decades of successful films, lucrative contracts, and shrewd investments. But what shocked his children was not just the size of the fortune, but the secrecy surrounding it. Throughout his life, Hackman had lived relatively modestly. He didn't flaunt his wealth or engage in the extravagant lifestyle that many of his contemporaries did. Yet beneath this exterior of simplicity lay an elaborate financial network designed to keep his fortune hidden even from those closest to him. Among the documents and papers Hackman left behind were evidence of offshore accounts, shell companies, and a complex web of investments. It became apparent that Hackman had gone to great lengths to conceal the extent of his wealth from his family, and in many ways, from the public eye. This wasn't merely about privacy, it was about control. Hackman had built an intricate financial structure to ensure that his wealth would remain largely undisclosed, even to those who would eventually inherit it. Perhaps the most shocking discovery came in the form of an untouched trust fund, a fund that Hackman had set up with a chilling condition. Anyone who attempted to access it before certain terms were met would forfeit their inheritance altogether. This wasn't just a trust, it was a mechanism of control, ensuring that even after his death, Hackman could manipulate the actions of his children and dictate the terms of their inheritance. The conditions of the inheritance: control from beyond the grave. When Gene Hackman's will was read, the family was confronted with another unexpected revelation. The inheritance came with strict conditions. In addition to the extensive financial restrictions, there were limitations on how his children could use his name or share personal stories about him. For example, Hackman's children were prohibited from writing books, producing documentaries, or giving interviews that focused on their relationship with him, under threat of losing their inheritance. These stipulations only added fuel to the already volatile family dynamic. His children felt betrayed, not just by their father's emotional absence, but by his decision to control their lives, even after death. The conditions were a final rejection, an unspoken message that even in his absence, Hackman did not trust his children to handle his legacy on their own terms. This final act of control over his fortune was a stark reminder of Hackman's inability to emotionally connect with his family. Throughout his life, he had chosen to withhold not just affection, but also the means to navigate his wealth. The emotional distance Hackman had created during his lifetime was now compounded by the financial restrictions he placed on his family's inheritance. The letters never sent, regrets, and missed opportunities. Amidst the paperwork and financial records, Hackman's family discovered something that would come to represent both the depth of his regrets and his inability to bridge the emotional gap between himself and his children. A collection of letters. These letters, addressed to each of his children, contained Hackman's personal reflections and regrets. In them, he expressed sorrow for his emotional detachment and acknowledged the pain he had caused by being absent during their childhoods. But these letters were never sent. Hackman had written them, but for reasons that remain unclear, he chose not to send them. Perhaps it was pride, a fear of rejection, or a simple reluctance to open up emotionally that kept him from reaching out to his children in a meaningful way. Whatever the reason, the fact that these letters were discovered only after his death served as a cruel irony. It was a revelation that Hackman had recognized his failings as a father, but he had chosen to keep those feelings hidden, even when he had the opportunity to make amends. For his children, discovering these letters was both heartbreaking and infuriating. They saw them as proof that their father had, at some point, wanted to connect with them, but ultimately chose not to. The letters were a symbol of the emotional distance that defined Hackman's relationship with his family, an ongoing cycle of longing for connection that never fully materialized. Hackman's final years, health struggles, and the desire for redemption. In his later years, Gene Hackman faced significant health challenges, including a heart condition that required him to make drastic changes to his lifestyle. Despite these health concerns, Hackman remained committed to maintaining his privacy. He lived quietly with Betsy in their Santa Fe home, away from the prying eyes of the public. In these final years, there were signs that Hackman was trying to reconcile with his past. Small gestures, such as reaching out to family members or showing appreciation for those who cared for him, suggested that he was, perhaps, trying to repair some of the damage he had done. However, these efforts came too late to fully heal the wounds created by his decades of emotional detachment. The tragic end, betrayal, secrets, and the inheritance that divided a family. When Gene Hackman died in February 2025, the world was left to mourn the loss of an iconic actor. But for his family, the true tragedy came not just in his passing, but in the painful process of dealing with the aftermath. The complex web of financial secrecy, the emotional distance that had defined their relationship with Hackman, and the burden of a fortune that had been concealed from them for so long were all elements that made his death even harder to bear. In the end, Hackman's legacy is a complicated one. While he left behind an impressive fortune and an iconic body of work, the true cost of his success was felt most acutely by the family he had left behind. His wealth, rather than being a source of comfort, served as a reminder of what was missing, the emotional connection that his children had always longed for but never fully received. The tragic end of Gene Hackman's life is a story of missed opportunities, secrets, and a legacy that is forever marred by the emotional distance he chose to maintain. A legacy forever shaped by secrets and emotional absence. Gene Hackman's story is not just the story of a Hollywood legend. It is also a cautionary tale of the toll that success and fame can take on family relationships. Hackman's enormous fortune, his successful career, and his decision to withdraw from public life all created a legacy that his children would be forced to navigate long after his death. The wealth that seemed like a blessing was, in many ways, a curse, one that perpetuated the emotional distance that Hackman had kept between himself and his family. As his children continue to grapple with the shock of discovering their father's secret fortune and the emotional scars left by his absence, Hackman's legacy remains a complicated one. His name will forever be associated with iconic films and unforgettable performances, but the true cost of his success was felt most profoundly by those who loved him the most. Gene Hackman's story is a reminder that, in the end, it is the relationships we nurture, not the wealth we accumulate, that truly define the legacy we leave behind.